Everyone's watching the wrong number. Mortgage rates are hovering around 6%, inventory is improving, and experts keep saying there won't be a crash. Meanwhile, something else is happening that almost nobody's talking about, and it's going to reshape who gets to own property in America for the next decade. The housing market isn't crashing. That's technically true, but what's actually unfolding is something potentially more damaging than a traditional crash, especially if you're still trying to get your foot in the door, because here's what people miss when they focus only on whether prices are going up or down. The game itself has fundamentally changed, and most folks are still playing by rules that stopped working years ago. Let's start with what everyone's fixated on. As of May 2026, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate sits at 6.2%. Not catastrophic, but not exactly thrilling either. Industry experts predict rates will stay in the 5.9 to 6.5% range through the rest of the year. The Mortgage Bankers Association thinks we'll hover near 6.3%. Fannie Mae is slightly more optimistic, projecting just above 6% by December. National home prices are expected to rise about 0.7% by the end of 2026. Some forecasts show a modest 1% increase year over year. JP Morgan predicts prices will essentially stall at 0% growth nationally. None of this screams disaster, right? Except you're looking at averages, and averages hide the real story. 28 out of America's 53 largest metro areas saw price decreases through February. Cape Coral, Florida dropped 9.6%. Meanwhile, Kansas City gained 8.6%. Pittsburgh and Cleveland also made the top 5 gainers. The West Coast and Sun Belt are getting hammered hardest, dealing with a glut of new construction from the pandemic building boom. So depending on where you live, your reality could be completely different from the national narrative. Housing prices nationwide edged up just 1.1% in the 12 months ending in February. That's the slowest rate since 2012. By the end of 2026, single-family houses on average will be fetching 1% less than at the start of the year. In real terms, accounting for inflation, home prices are actually declining. They're becoming more affordable relative to other goods and services. Sounds like good news, doesn't it? Wage growth is projected at 3.4% in 2026, outpacing projected home price increases by 1.2 percentage points. Affordability has improved for 8 consecutive months. The market is the most balanced it's been in almost a decade, according to National Association of Realtors data. So why does it still feel impossible for most people to buy a house? Because the real problem isn't mortgage rates, it's not even home prices in isolation. The actual crisis is the massive divergence between what homes cost and what people actually earn. Families are now paying nearly 6 times their annual income for a home. Back in 2003, that multiple was 4.3. In 2017, it was 5.1. Today, it's approaching 6.0. According to Redfin, an American family needs to make $110,000 a year to afford a typical home. That's 29% higher than what the median household actually makes. Over half of survey respondents said people simply don't earn enough money to afford a home. Another 50% said mortgage rates are too high. When you dig into what's really happening beneath the surface statistics, you start to see why this matters more than whether we technically have a crash or not. The housing shortage narrative gets thrown around constantly. You've probably heard we're short millions of homes. Realtor.com estimated the shortfall at just over 4 million in 2025. Sounds catastrophic. But JP Morgan Global Research put the actual figure around 1.2 million homes. That's significantly lower than the panic-inducing numbers floating around. Some research suggests the shortage has been wildly overemphasized. Housing supply generally outpaces population growth even in expensive markets. So what gives? Turns out the problem might not be supply at all. It's demand. Specifically, the type of demand and where economic growth is distributed across income levels. House prices and median income tracked each other almost perfectly until 2000. After that, home price growth completely detached from wage growth. The labor market fundamentally changed. Economic gains started flowing disproportionately to higher earners while middle and lower incomes stagnated. You can build all the houses you want. If wages don't support purchasing them, affordability doesn't improve. We've been solving the wrong problem. Here's what actually is changing. The lock-in effect is starting to disappear. For years, homeowners with 3% mortgages refused to sell because buying again meant accepting 6% rates. Life doesn't pause indefinitely, though. Divorces happen, job relocations occur, people downsize or need bigger spaces. More inventory is hitting the market as life-changing events force reluctant sellers to list their properties. Home sales are expected to increase about 14% nationwide in 2026 as lower rates qualify more buyers. This creates what some are calling the Great Housing Reset, not a crash, not a boom. Just the market finding equilibrium after years of chaos. Buyers will have more selection and negotiating power than they've had since the pandemic started. For investors, modestly declining prices combined with flat or slightly growing rents are creating cash flow conditions we haven't seen in roughly a decade. But affordability for regular buyers, that's a different calculation entirely. Monthly mortgage payments are expected to decline for the first time since 2020. Lower rates will help offset the roughly 2% home price growth projected. In real terms, accounting for inflation, homes are becoming cheaper relative to other goods and services. Progress, technically. Except when the baseline is this broken, small improvements don't fix the fundamental issue. You still need to earn $110,000 annually to afford a typical home, while median household income sits 29% below that threshold. The gap is narrowing incrementally, but incrementally doesn't help someone trying to buy now. What we're witnessing isn't a housing market crash. It's a slow-motion affordability crisis where the metrics show stability while an entire generation gets priced out of homeownership. Prices aren't collapsing. Foreclosures remain low. Credit standards are strict. Everything looks healthy on paper. Meanwhile, families are stuck renting because the math simply doesn't work. The war with Iran threw another wrench into the equation. Energy prices spiked. Inflation fears returned. Mortgage rates that had been trending downward suddenly jumped back up in March before settling slightly lower by late April. Uncertainty makes planning impossible. So when someone asks if the housing market will crash in 2026, the answer is almost certainly no. But that's not the question that matters. The real question is whether housing will become accessible to people earning median incomes anytime soon. And the data suggests we're looking at years, not months, before that gap closes meaningfully. The market isn't broken in the traditional sense. It's functioning exactly as designed. The design just doesn't serve the people who need housing most. That's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. Understanding all of this doesn't make it easier to swallow, but at least you know what you're actually dealing with. The crash everyone's watching for probably isn't coming. What's happening instead is a permanent recalibration of who gets access to homeownership and who doesn't. The market will stabilize, prices will find their level, investors will adjust their strategies accordingly, but if you're waiting for some dramatic collapse that suddenly makes homes affordable on a median income, you're waiting for something that isn't on the horizon. The system isn't designed to crash anymore, it's designed to price people out gradually while maintaining the illusion of stability. That's what makes this situation more insidious than a traditional crash. At least crashes create opportunities when everything resets. This is just a slow squeeze with no release valve in sight. The people who figure out how to navigate this landscape will build wealth. Everyone else will keep renting and wondering why hard work doesn't translate to homeownership like it used to. That's the brutal reality of 2026. The market isn't crashing. It's just leaving most people behind while looking perfectly healthy on paper.